Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 18th chapter. He also told this parable, that is Jesus, to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. And the Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. Tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than that other one. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. The one who humbles himself will be exalted. The word of the Lord. You may be seated. I was trying to figure out how to get this message across this week, and I remembered that wonderful staple of culture, The Price is Right. And so, without further ado, the first contestant, come on down. The second contestant, come on down. The third contestant, come on down. The fourth contestant, come on down. So at this part of the game, everyone's familiar with The Price is Right, right? And the start of it is they're bidding on something, right? At least I hope that's what I remember it being. So we're going to have them bid on something very important. What do you think your life's worth?
Well, I'm a very successful person. I provide many jobs and live in an extremely nice home in a well-off neighborhood. I drive a car that turns heads. I really am at the top of my field, and I'm sought after to speak of my success. I have even written books about it. The people who work for me always tell me how great I am, and they're right. That is why my life matters, and I say it all with a wonderful British accent.
Contestant number 2, what is your life worth?
I am a very moral person. In my church and the community at large, people know how I always obey the rules. I don't associate with people who aren't good enough, but always make sure to be seen with the right kind of people. People know I don't tolerate any kind of sinfulness and look up to me as a modern day saint, which is exactly what I am. That is why my life.
That's why your life matters. Okay, contestant number 3.
It's not good enough to be successful or to be moral. You have to demonstrate that you are on the right side of history. That is why I stand up for the latest cause. I am always willing to get in there to show my support for the biggest or the smallest of issues. Years from now, people will look and see all I did to make the world better, how I was right. That is why my life matters.
Contestant number 4, what is your life worth?
Well, if I honestly look at my life, I haven't been successful, moral, or even promoting justice. There's nothing in my life which has made me worth anything at all. If my life is worth something, someone else is going to have to pay for it.
Thank you. Give them all a big hand. The person who gets closest to the price without going over wins. I think we all know who that person is. I think we've all heard that. Some of you are still getting the wrong answers, I hear. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than that other, or those others. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. You know, our day and age is a little different from Jesus' day and age. There was one culture in Jesus' day and age, but today we have many different gods. We live in a polytheistic world, if we're really honest. Luther, writing in the Large Catechism, talks about how a God is one to whom we look for all assistance and to whom we run to in all need. And he says this is why these two things go together, faith and God. If your faith is true, you have the true God. If your faith is false, you have an idol. Some people look to the God of success to justify them. The God of morality to justify them. Indeed, even the God of being on the right side of history, which is a very Hegelian point of view for those of you who are interested in philosophy. The result, we should note, is always the same. The passage breaks down into three rough parts. The introduction, which is the audience and the setting. The parable itself, and Jesus' final verdict, which is actually delayed a little bit. We miss something if we rush past this introduction. Jesus also told this parable to some who trusted, peito, in themselves that they were righteous, diakos, and treated other loikos with contempt, exothenitos. Now, firstly, I like to go through the Greek because it's important to know what's being said. This word peito, which means trusted, means that they have persuaded, they've convinced themselves that they are, first off, righteous enough. And second off, they're righteous. Why? Because they're better than other people. It's like the old joke about the two men running from a bear. You don't have to be faster than the bear, you just have to be faster than the other guy. That's how we view righteousness in our culture, isn't it? I may be bad, but I'm not that bad. And eventually you get down the line and it's like, well, I'm not Hitler. And it's amazing that we set the bar so low. We expect that death and sin aren't going to be able to catch us if they're already chasing someone else. So what's interesting is how this parable starts off. They are righteous, and they had persuaded themselves. What? That this righteous word, diakios, which is also the Hebrew word tzadik, which means justice and righteousness. When you see in the Bible, both Old and the New Testaments, when you see righteousness or justice, just bear in mind, most of the time, those two words can be interchanged. You cannot be both privately and publicly moral. You have to be both. You have to choose. If you're a moral person on the inside, but you don't show it, how far does your morality really extend? But on the other hand, if you're just showing people that you're moral, but inside your life's a wreck, then you're just window dressing. So the Bible considers that both these words are the same. What's interesting here, the word that is translated for how he treated others is the word loikos, which doesn't just mean others, it can mean the rest. I'm so much better than the rest of the people. That's what's being gotten across here. And finally, exothunitos is used several times. Luke 23 uses it. This word is contempt. The word contempt. He treats others with contempt. What's interesting is the other places where Luke uses this word. In Luke 23:11, It's used to describe Jesus' treatment by the soldiers and the rulers and the people who hold power over him. Jesus is treated with contempt by the so-called righteous people, the so-called just people, the so-called powerful. And in Acts 4:11, we see it used in a different way. The stone which the builders rejected, there it is again, exthumutos. The stone which the builders regarded with contempt has become the cornerstone. In 1 Corinthians 1:28, we see that it is declared that God chose the contemptible, exthumutos, of the world to do what? To overpower the powerful. Already, this is not looking, just from this introduction, like it's going to work out so well for the Pharisee. And indeed, it doesn't. We also note that Jesus is telling this all right to their faces here in the introduction. This is something we overlook as we try and get into the parable, but notice what he says. He tells this to their faces. This parable, this is who you are. This is your choice. There are two things to notice about these two people that go up to the temple. First off, both men stand far off from God. You ever notice that? Both men don't come before God. The tax collector because he is ashamed, and the Pharisee because he is proud. The second thing is to note how they define themselves. They don't necessarily define themselves by what they do. The Pharisee does a little. They define themselves by what they are not. The Pharisee is not like those other people. He's not like the rest. The tax collector has not measured up. He's not a righteous person. However, Jesus notes that only one man, one of these people, was justified. Now, it's very important for us to look at all of this. The notion is of exaltation. In Luke chapter 14:11, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the person who humbles himself will be exalted. Jesus has also rebuked the misguided desires of the Pharisaical televangelists of his day, telling them in Luke 16:15, you are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your heart. For what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God. The word that is used here for the humbling at the end here in 14, I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other, so justification. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. And we would be a little angry, maybe, if we think about this. Are we supposed to get down and grovel? Is this the kind of God that we worship? I thought God was supposed to make me a better person. I thought God was supposed to give me this purpose in my life to do what I want to do. And yet, that's not the case. And we would be, again, very angry with God if the story ended there. Now notice, that's the conclusion that Jesus draws. But how does he back it up? How does Christ back up that conclusion? Well, there's something very interesting about this God we serve. There's nothing in the world that he will ask you to do that he has not already done himself. We're confronted with this curious thing about God, this oddity. And if we look, say, in the Gospel of John, Notice this word, we see this word exaltation. And whenever exaltation is found in John, what's interesting is what the exaltation is caused by. It's caused by the cross. The exaltation of Christ is the cross, the most miserable and humiliating of deaths that you could get. The deaths of slaves, the deaths of non-citizens. It was not just a death, it was a public shame. And yet, in the Gospel of John, Jesus tells the people 3 times that he will be lifted up. That is, he will be exalted. The Greek word is hupsong, for those of you who are interested. In John 3:14, that's just as Moses was lifted up the snake in the desert, so too will I be lifted up. 8:28, 12:32. In each of these passages, what Jesus is saying is that he will be lifted up on the cross, the instrument of humiliation. He will be humbled, the ultimate humiliation. He will be killed by the people who taste death. He who knew no sin will become sin. And in that humiliation, his exaltation will be complete. And it will be given to you and given to me. Put another way, Christ humbled himself by going to the cross so that, in order that he could be exalted. That was the only way. Acts 2:33 and Acts 5:31 both declare the same thing, using the same exact word. The exaltation of Christ is the crucifixion of Christ. Friends, many of us gather into churches and we worship and we glorify God. And we pass over the cross. We pass over the cost of the glorification. Because if we see Christ on the cross, Christ crucified, we realize that as his followers, those who follow after him, that too is the only way that we will be promised that glory. So many of us sing songs where we talk about the glory of God, but please don't make us remember the cross. Friends, the cross, the humiliation of the cross, is the only way that the exaltation of God can take place. Maybe our gods are a little bit different than they were in Jesus' day. For one thing, there are much more of them. But the way of supposedly winning their affection has remained the same. Deny your identity as a sinner, as a screw-up, as a poor beggar, and embrace your identity as a VIP, a celebrity, some sort of postmodern saint, or at the very least, you're better than the rest. But Christ's way is different. It is a way that he has already shown us by being humbled and lifted up. And so here at the end of the parable, we read not just the way that the disciples should be, but rather the way Christ is. We see his identity, and there's nothing that he commands of us that he has not already gone through. It is the way of the trusting faith, and not the way of the proud, that leads to this glory.